Thank you, Marilyn. Thanks very much for reading us home to the very end of the story. For the past 4 Sundays, we've been hearing the story of Joseph's odyssey from being the boy in the colorful coat to the kid who becomes the second in command of all of Egypt. And today's chapter is the most poignant. Joseph meets up with his brothers again and finally reveals his identity after 20 years after they sold him into slavery. He declares that he forgives them. And as a result, this story is remembered as a story about forgiveness. But if you read the story closely in the Bible, it provides few clues to how Joseph got to that conclusion that he forgives his brothers. We never hear Joseph talk about how much he hates them or how much he resents them. How could they do this to me? We never get a clue of how he gets over all of those emotions. Joseph just doesn't seem to wrestle with emotions much, except for holding back tears when he first sees his brothers. And we find that surprising because for us Christians, it's all about forgiveness. We consider forgiveness to be one of the great spiritual virtues. I think we've all been in situations where someone has done us wrong and we become filled with bitterness and resentment, even hatred. We find our minds running through all these thoughts, ruminating, how could they do this to me? Didn't they understand how I would feel? Did they do this to me on purpose? I don't get it. Why are they torturing me like this? How could they? And sometimes we even fantasize about getting back at them, plotting revenge. All that negative energy can eat you up inside. It can make you utterly miserable, unable to enjoy your life. And often your foe doesn't even know what you're going through. You're torturing yourself, not them. They become a stick figure, a villain in your melodrama, and you get blinded to their real self. So Jesus tells us that we should forgive others so we don't have to go through this. And not only should we forgive others, but God forgives us. Forgiveness is liberating. It can free us from getting stuck in that dark place. And often the way we get there is by giving our bitterness away. We hand it over to God. We pray, oh God, please take this poison away from me. Or we may take a good look at ourselves and realize that we are imperfect beings, and we too are subject to the same range of emotions that can lead other people to do things against us which we resent. We realize that we're not so different from the person who hurt us. And when we get to that point, it can help us realize, maybe I would have done that in their place. Maybe they did that in their context for a reason which made sense to them, even if it hurt me. In realizing that we're not so different from the flawed person, we can give up our bitterness. We give it up. We give it away. That's why the word forgiving says it all. Forgiving. Forgiving is for giving away your bitterness, giving away your hatred. Just take it away. I don't want it anymore. Our society encourages us to wrestle with forgiveness and these issues privately. When someone steals your car and they get caught, it doesn't matter whether you forgive them or not. They're still going to go to jail and serve the same amount of time. The thief is separated from you and the rest of society by being in prison. And if you forgive them, they may never know, and you will probably never meet them in person. Our model of justice is based on punishment, not reconciliation. And one of the problems with this system is that if you can't forgive them, if you hang on to your bitterness, which often happens, particularly for more serious crimes, it's like two people are in jail. The person who committed the crime and you, as you wrestle with your bitterness and your anger. You're both stuck. You get locked up with bitterness, and they're locked up in their cell. And each person will need to work this out on their own. In today's story, we never know how Joseph reached the conclusion where he could forgive his brothers. There's no Hamlet-like soliloquies where he wrestles with hatred and revenge fantasies and then decides to forgive them. So at the end of the story, when Joseph declares that he forgives his brothers, we have no idea how he got there. He seems to have already forgiven them when they show up the first time. If he hadn't forgiven them, he could have thrown them in jail forever or even killed them. He has that power. But he doesn't. This suggests that he'd forgiven them long before they were all reunited in Egypt. So whatever this story is about, it's not intended to teach us about how to forgive each other. All of the steps in that, the psychological steps, are just missing. They're not on the page. So what is this story about? Well, it's tempting to think that it's a story about a man's desire to reunite his entire family. And that certainly fits with Joseph's actions. He keeps creating these ruses so that his brothers will have to come back to Egypt. But that begs the question, why didn't he just tell them who he was when they first arrived? They say, "Please, sir, can I have some grain?" And he says, "Hey, guess what? It's me. It's Joseph. All is forgiven. I've done real well. I have all the power of Egypt. Tell Dad and Benjamin and all your wives to come on down and we'll all live happily ever after." But Joseph doesn't do that. Instead, he keeps his identity secret. Earlier, I mentioned that forgiveness is liberating. It's like getting a new lease on life when you can give away your bitterness to God or just let it float away. But there are different kinds of forgiveness. Often the person we forgive never knows that they're forgiven, and they may have left our life, may have been a complete stranger. They may be a person we never see again, or they may have passed away, which often happens too. Our act of forgiveness restores our spiritual health, but it does nothing for them. They're oblivious, and the community that we both live in is not changed. Only you are by that private act of forgiveness. Joseph has forgiven his brothers in secret, but what will it take for him to go public with his forgiveness? To tell his brothers that he forgives them and reveal his true identity? Because it doesn't happen right away. It appears that he wants to test them before he comes clean. After all, he hasn't seen them for 20 years. They could still be the lying, scheming scoundrels who sold him into slavery. So he sets up a test. He tells them that he will sell them the grain, but if they come back for more, they have to bring their younger brother, Benjamin. He then secretly puts money in their packs and keeps one of the brothers back as a hostage. So now the question is, will they take the money and run, abandoning the brother like they abandoned him? That's what scoundrels would do. Well, not too long after, they come back with the money and with Benjamin, the son Jacob loves best. But it's risky. If anything should happen to Benjamin, it will break Jacob's heart. His father's already lost Joseph. He doesn't want to lose Benjamin. Jacob's never fully recovered from losing Joseph. With the money and Benjamin in Egypt, Joseph holds a great big feast and he releases the brother who was held in hostage. This is what Marilyn was telling us about. But he still hasn't revealed his true identity. He's waiting for something. There's one more test. Now we've caught up with today's scripture reading. Joseph sells his brothers the grain, and he's willing to let them go back to their father Jacob. But he secretly has his staff put a silver cup into Benjamin's pack. And he tells his steward, "Go catch them and tell them that they've stolen the cup." So when the steward confronts them, Judah stands up and says, "That's impossible. If anyone has stolen that cup, they deserve to die or be enslaved." This is the kind of rash thing that people say in fairy tales all the time. It's never good to pretend that you know the whole truth about anything. Only God knows that. That's God's department, not ours. So when the steward finds the cup in Benjamin's pack, suddenly Benjamin is doomed to die or be enslaved because of Judah's rash boast. The brothers now face a terrible situation. Once again, they're going to have to go back to their father Jacob and say, you know that favorite son you entrusted us with? We don't have him anymore. But what will they say this time? Will they lie? Will they say an animal ate him? Will they tell the truth? Joseph has cleverly recreated the exact same conditions which led him to be sold into slavery. The question is, are these brothers still so wicked as they were back then? It's one thing to forgive a person secretly. It's another thing to tell them to their face. When you tell someone that you forgive them, you're taking a chance. They might reject your forgiveness. They might defend themselves all over again and say, oh, that's crazy. I did the right thing. You're wrong. Or they might accept it and take it as an opportunity to have a renewed relationship with you, an honest one, so they can admit what they've done and why they did it. And that honesty can pave the way for a new relationship, a reunion based on reconciliation. That appears to be what Joseph is trying to discover. He doesn't want to reveal his true identity to his brothers until he has proof that they're different from the scoundrels who sold him into slavery 20 years before. Will they leave Benjamin behind and repeat history all over again? It's at this moment that Judah speaks up. This is the same Judah, you will remember, who was the one who said, let's sell Joseph into slavery. This is the same Judah who had been confronted by his pregnant daughter-in-law, Tamar. This is the same Judah who recognized then that he had cheated her, that she was more righteous than he was. It is this big brother standing before Joseph who says he is willing to sacrifice himself to take Benjamin's place so that Jacob's heart will not be broken. He's learned from his encounter with Tamar about how important it is to have empathy and to feel for other people, to imagine how they're seeing the world. He has become a moral agent. He's more concerned about his father's broken heart than his own welfare. He declares that he is willing to give up his life for another. And it's at this moment that Joseph breaks down. He tells all the guards to get out so that he can openly weep and declare his true identity to his brothers. All this time, Joseph was waiting to see if his brothers could understand another person's pain. Reconciliation is the stage after forgiveness. We can forgive privately, but reconciliation is only possible in public, with the people who have wronged you. Joseph knows that for reconciliation to be possible, the other person has to have sufficient moral character to be able to listen to the views of the person who has been wronged, and even admit that they have done wrong. Judah's sacrifice shows that he can do that. A woman, Tamar, has awakened in him humility and empathy. And now, Joseph can reveal his true self to his brothers because this time they can see him. And you'll notice that Tamar reveals herself, and so does Joseph. There's two disguises here, and both of them are waiting to see if the other person will understand who they really are. Facing someone who has hurt you takes courage. It's hard to look someone in the eye and reveal your feelings. It's hard for them too. But if each side is willing to listen, open up enough to really hear what the other side is saying, then a higher order of healing is possible for the victim, the perpetrator, and the community. That's what happened in South Africa during the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It was chaired by Bishop Desmond Tutu, who opened each meeting with a prayer. Whites and blacks faced each other, giving statements of both sides of the apartheid regime. These were very, very difficult encounters between people who had been enemies. But it seemed like the only way to clear the air so that there could be a chance of a post-apartheid society. Here in Canada, we've had our own Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but ours took a different route. It didn't give accusers and victims a chance to look each other in the face and talk about what had happened. Instead, it was designed so that Indigenous people who had suffered abuse during the residential schools period could come forward and give their statements to the government, specifically to a commission. But their abusers weren't asked to give statements and weren't asked to face them in public. And that may be one of the reasons why in Canada, many of us feel that Indigenous concerns are not really our problem, because that face-to-face encounter didn't happen, and neither really did reconciliation. There was a lot of truth, but we're still working on the reconciliation part. But the desire for face-to-face reconciliation is growing. Last summer, Black federal members of Parliament, known as the Black Caucus, members from all parties, issued a call for change in how the justice system works. Among their recommendations was the increased use of something called restorative justice. This process has victims and offenders meet with family and members of the community present. It's similar to Indigenous healing circles. It allows victims to express their hurt directly to the offender. But more than this, it allows them to ask questions, cathartic questions. Why did you do this to me? What brought you to this? And the offender gets to provide answers. For many people, this system provides a way to get emotional closure and healing, which would be impossible if the offender was just locked away in jail. The system is slowly being tried across the country, and it's actually in use in the TDSB, the Toronto District School Board. People are finding that it works better than simply expelling students. And the Black community in particular has been interested in this because expulsion rates are wildly out of whack for the Black community, for their students. And being expelled leads to higher rates of not finishing high school. So that's one of the reasons why the Black Caucus in Ottawa had asked for restorative justice to be applied more generally for students as well as for adults, because Black people have been suffering from our justice system in a way which whites have not. And restorative justice is a less punitive way of getting people together and healing the community as well as those who have been wronged. Facing the person who hurt you and telling the truth takes us beyond forgiveness into reconciliation. Where forgiveness can relieve the pain of the victim, reconciliation can heal an entire community, including the offender. In the Joseph story, Joseph is finally able to reveal his identity. His father is finally brought to Egypt by his brothers, and the Pharaoh gives them the best land for all their herds, and they settle in Egypt. The entire family is finally reunited and knows the truth. It's a happy ending. But in our case, we're still waiting for a happy ending. But if Joseph could find one, we can find one too, if we just keep trying. Amen.